put your recognition of such a national holiday as our Independence Day. And America is always known all over the world for freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. And our ancestors prized these political freedoms so much that many of them were willing to go to great lengths and to great sacrifices to establish them and to defend them. This is the greatness of America. Not our military might, not our economic power. Greatness and uniqueness in the world historically has been founded in these freedoms. Tyranny has never tolerated any of them. You know, when we're in our immature thinking stage of our life, we believe that freedom means basically the ability to do whatever we want to do whenever we want to do it. And of course that's not true. You cannot call in a bomb threat to a school or yell fire in a crowded assembly hall and expect your freedom of speech to protect you from the coming consequences. There will be consequences. There are limits to freedoms because freedoms are always relational. Freedoms are always evolving. Kind of like the Constitution does not really discuss what the framers intended so much as what they would allow, which is a different conversation. Therefore, our freedoms come as evolving understanding with the aim, to quote our founding fathers and mothers, the aim is the enjoyment of the domestic tranquility. Now, St. Paul, in his letter to Galatia, did not have the framers of the Constitution or the American Revolution or America at all in mind when he was writing. Paul was writing about something far more radical and revolutionary than what George Washington or Thomas Jefferson ever considered. Paul was interested in a real revolution, real freedom to pursue the kingdom of God. Even in the midst of the Empire Rome, he believed that there was access to a freedom that truly set people free. Notice in our first reading that Scott gave to us today, this double ring of freedom. For freedom, you have been set free. He wanted to expand the understanding of what tranquility would really look like from God's point of view. Let's review that because we had a very confusing reading in between. So let me go back to the reading from Galatians 5. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment. You shall love your neighbors as yourself. Have you ever seen your freedom or understood your freedom as bound up in service to your neighbor? The vocation of the church, the job of the church, is to celebrate the politics of such loving. Now that may seem a little bit odd to match the words politics and loving in the same sentence. Because politics we often see as sort of a necessary but nasty kind of thing. Politics, someone has said, is the art of what is possible, what is attainable, and I actually like that. Because there's a scarcity, and oftentimes we don't seem to get what we need or want, and there's never enough of the things that you want. I mean, tariffs in the world, negotiation towards agreements between businesses or at a car dealership, or tantrums of a 3-year-old, are ways to get what we want. And there really isn't anything wrong with getting what you want, of course. But what do you want? So think for a moment about what you actually want. Oftentimes it's more money, more time, less stress, fewer problems. Yet I can have enormous sums of money. I can have as many clothes, houses, cars, and degrees as I want, but if I don't have the things that St. Paul wrote about, that he's talking about, those other things are of no good to me. Amen. Thank you. What? All right, finally, somebody. These things do not contribute to domestic tranquility, so to speak. They may contribute, of course, to personal momentary happiness of ownership. I mean, it's always exciting for at least a few weeks to have a new car, the car you've been eyeing for a long time. I mean, but would you trade a sense of peace and well-being inside, or the sense of a real peace between peoples, neighbors, and nations for any kind of car? I mean, you can have your Mercedes, but your life without peace, I don't know. Is it worth it? Most of us would say no. But if you have a deep sense of peace, which is just one of the values that Paul's lifting up, just a deep sense of peace, I would doubt that you would worry at all what kind of car you had, because you had peace, even if you needed a car. Of course, the cynical materialists in us all, and those that are particularly weighing by that today, would like to trade some of that virtue for value of giving wealth a spin. And although we live in like the richest nation in the history of the world, we make the assumption that there's not enough. Not enough life, not enough food, not enough entertainment, not enough happiness. And this keeps the economy going, and that's kind of how it greases the wheel. Nothing's wrong with getting what you want, right? Unless you want for the wrong things. I mean, the truth is often the opposite, isn't it? That there's actually too much. The issues that we face in our lives isn't scarcity, it's the glut of too much. We're overwhelmed. Our imaginations can't take it all in, and we're more isolated, than we've been. We're less able to solve communication problems than we used to be able to do. Loneliness is an epidemic among every demographic group, especially among our seniors. Loneliness in a world that is hyper-connected. In the Christian church, the politic is always to be focused on the building of community. For the whole law, Paul wrote, is summed up in a single command. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. St. Paul still involves politics, but politics of a different kind. Instead of carving up a limited cake, politics becomes a shared discernment of the best use of our gifts. And if you look at that list, right? Love, peace, joy, gentleness, all those things, self-control. Are any of those a pie that you can cut up and get all of it gone? No. There's no scarcity in any of those things. The more you get of them, the more there is. The more peace you have, the greater the peace there is. The more love you have, the more love you express, more often than not, the more love there is, the more love that's expressed. It's a crazy kind of mathematics compared to usual forms of politics. The freedom of a Christian is a paradox, isn't it? It's to embrace dually the liberating love of God, which does not ever let us go, which holds us fast in life, and to embrace the liberating service of other people. There's the rub. Last week I spoke about the story of the Gerasene demoniac, the guy who had 6,000 demons living within, and the message was about seeing the inherent worth of people. I mean, God's original intent, God's seal of approval and delight in creating humanity, that particular human being and the man at Gerasene. And as we live in relationship to God's and God's love, the body politic of love begins to infect us. As we spend more time with our relationship with God, love is that commodity that grows. It's a stock market that never goes down, continues to go up. And the invitation in that story is to see the inherent worth of individuals. But if you are serious with me as we follow through that story, you have to know that there's a challenge in that story, isn't there? Because the brokenness of the man possessed by Legion would challenge absolutely every one of us in the room to see his inherent worth. It would be lost under his brokenness. Only Jesus is able to see that and restore it. So we stay embracing, liberating love of God. But as we live in this unconditional acceptance and love for who we were created to be, we begin to experience the worth of ourselves, and we begin to experience the worth of others. We are freed from the tyranny of trying to find acceptance from God. This is the function of the law that Paul's talking about, particularly circumcision as it was lived out among the earliest Gentile Christian followers. There was no tyranny of finding acceptance because Christ gave us God's acceptance, demonstrated God's nearness to us, God's intimate mercy that was intended for you every day of your life. And we are, thank you, and we are freed from the, I'm getting used to this, you better watch out. We are freed from the tyranny of license. I'm going to get a cadence here pretty soon. I can feel it. We are freed from the tyranny of license. And that's the issue that we all face. License that moves us toward the flesh and abandons the holiness of God's presence already with us, already living inside of us, already here, declared so at Pentecost. And so we would respect ourselves enough, we would love ourselves enough not to indulge in any kind of self-medicating behaviors that Paul listed in our reading for today. Instead, we would return to the source, to the Spirit that gives us life, that gives us love. That would be the heartbeat of our lives, surrounding both the liberating love of God and the liberating service of others. And I believe this is best accomplished in the paradox of loving community, because that's where we get to really try it out, right? I mean, it's one thing when it's God and me, but when it's God and me, you guys mess it up, you know. According to Paul, the only thing that counts is faith working through love. Amen. Just as, man, that pushes the gas button. Just as each generation of American children must learn anew that the Pledge of Allegiance maintains that civil liberty, civil freedom, is a function to fidelity to justice. Yes. Thank you. Wasn't sure I was going to get one on that one. So that each generation of Jesus followers also must learn anew that Christian liberty, our freedom, is a function of fidelity to the law of love. That's the source of our freedom. The great 20th century religious thinker Reinhold Niebuhr put it this way. Basically, love means, he said, being responsible to our family, toward our civilization, and now, by the pressures of history, toward the universe of humankind. To really be free is to be freed and liberated from the prison, from the tyranny of me, myself, and I. To be truly free is to be able to move beyond the self. To be free is to be free for responsibility, not free from responsibility. I think of how Christ, who had everything in the world going for him, right? I mean, power, status, safety, and how he chose freely to empty himself and to take on the cross in the form of a servant for the sake of the world. And he points that example to us and says, there's freedom. And it's paradoxical to us who are captured by license, because that does not look like freedom. It looks like some kind of enslavement. We have arrived at a time when we value and virtue biting at each other, which is what Paul talked about it in Galatians 5. And he warned us that we might consume each other. So, as the people of God, as the church, we must remain a countercultural presence of community formed by the Spirit of God, showing forth in our presence and in our relationships the fruit of the Spirit, meaning the very presence of God in, among, and between us. This itself is a big challenge. I like the little test that Frederick Beeker, who's a Christian writer of a generation ago, Beeker wrote, if you have not cried for someone other than yourself in the last year, then the chances are you're already dead. I think that's a good place to start, having feelings of empathy for each other. But I know I haven't passed the test until I actually have done something, he says. To make a call, bake a pie, write a letter, offer comfort, stand up for someone whose voice is not being heard. How did Paul put it? The only thing that matters is faith working in love. If we're together by the Spirit of God, we are working always to build the beloved community, which is our theme, with freedom and responsibility woven together in our life together, in our lives, and the life of our faith community. Learned Hand, that's a guy's name. He was a judge of the last century. He was an anti-McCarthyism judge. His name is Learned Hand. Okay. Trivial Pursuit, you're going to ace it. There it is. There it is. He once asked himself, what is the spirit of liberty? And here's his answer. He wrote these eloquent words. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which seeks to understand the minds of other men and women. It weighs their interests alongside its own. It remembers that not even a sparrow falls to the earth unheeded. The spirit of liberty is the spirit of him who 2,000 years ago taught humanity a lesson it has never learned but has never quite forgotten either. That there may be a kingdom where the least shall be heard and considered side by side with the greatest. May all of our pledges of allegiance be this day to that kind of kingdom on earth, as it is in heaven, as we will pray, where this kind of liberty resounds and where the law of love is lived. Amen.